And so we come to The Mystery at the Manor, Chapter 12. The other day, my granddaughter Lexi was playing out in the garden and she found some lovely juicy worms, which she liked very much. Which reminded me of the name of this chapter. Chapter 12 is The Early Bird Catches the... but not worm. Actually, it says here, the thief. So chapter 12, The Early Bird Catches the Thief. Pip woke up very early the next morning. He lay quite still for a moment or two, listening. He was sure that something had disturbed him. At first all was quiet, and then he heard it again. It was a cross between a squawk and a rattle. If he hadn't been fishing with Gramps the other day and heard the same thing, he would have thought that it was something unnatural. However, Gramps had explained that it was the noise that pheasants make. Pip had been surprised. He had often noticed these large reddish-brown birds in the fields or at the roadside, but he had never imagined that they could make such a horrible sound. There it came again, so loud that he was sure it must be right outside his window. He knelt up and pushed his head under the curtains. There was nothing to see, apart from a few sparrows hopping around, but at least the noise had stopped as abruptly as it had started. Pip stretched. He began to realise that he was so fully awake now that he wouldn't be able to get back to sleep again. Outside it was a glorious day. The sun was streaming down through the leaves of the trees, and as he watched there was a flash of black and white, and a magpie went swooping past and landed high in the hawthorn tree that was just through his window. Immediately the pheasant reacted loudly. He had been roosting in the lower branches, almost level with Pip's bed, and he obviously objected to company landing in his upstairs twigs. That settled it for Pip. Even if he had wanted to doze off again, there would be no chance with Mr. Noisy only a few feet away. He looked at his watch. It was only 10 to 6. No one else in the family would even be awake. But he felt it was time to be up and about, and decided to sneak out and do a bit of bird watching. It was not very often that Pip was out by himself, and he couldn't remember ever being out so early. He decided to go up to the sunny top field. One of his favourite places was the climbing frame. This was an old rusty ladder, which bent over the top and down to the ground on the other side. Once it had been brightly painted, but over the years all trace of colour had vanished. Now the gentle rusty brown rungs almost worked like camouflage, and the frame was hardly noticeable from the footpath that came up into the sight from the sea wall. This early in the morning there seemed to be no one else around, as Pip climbed to the top of the frame and sat very still. Out here there were plenty of sparrows chattering and chirping, among a little flock of chaffinches who were darting about below his perch. They were obviously enjoying the remains of a packet of crisps that one of the children must have dropped yesterday. As one pink little chaffinch took hold of a rather large crisp in its beak, shaking it around, crumbs were being scattered all around, and the other birds were enjoying the feast. Before very long, a bright red robin came to join the throng. A blur of deep blue and pink descended from behind Pip, and a larger bird that he didn't recognise hopped down to share the bounty. Gramps would know what kind of bird it was. He would have to ask him about it when he got back. A pair of collared doves cooed as they snuggled up together high in the branches of a sycamore. As Pip looked up to see where the gentle murmuring was coming from, he noticed a huge seagull soaring above him. It was flying high over the course of the river, on the lookout for anything it could scavenge. Pip found that it was easier to spot these high flyers if he lay down on the top of the rail of the climbing frame, looking upwards. It wouldn't be comfortable for a long stay, but it gave him an excellent view. At first the raucous call of the sea-bird drowned out all the other noises, but then gradually Pip became conscious of a knocking sound. He changed his position until he was lying full length on his stomach along the topmost bars of the frame, and could tell where the sound was coming from. By concentrating hard, he could just make out a dark green bird with a black and white head. He was using his beak to knock the grubs from a hollow tree trunk in the trees at the back of the area near their den, right across the field. Pip suddenly became aware that there was someone else out this early, but if he hadn't been looking towards the woodpecker, he wouldn't have seen him, moving stealthily along the footpath, keeping his head bowed, so that he wouldn't ordinarily have been visible above the hedge. If Pip hadn't been high up on that climbing frame, he wouldn't have seen him either. Pip watched, fascinated. As the figure neared the entrance to the site, he paused to look and listen. He glanced furtively from left to right, and then, seeing that the coast was clear, he slipped into the campsite, moving quite quickly now. It was the Shadow, dressed in black from head to foot, with his hooded sweatshirt almost covering his face. Pip felt uneasily as the Shadow began to cross the playing field, but he didn't seem to be looking upwards, and Pip was still above eye level. He knew that he'd have to move soon, because it was becoming uncomfortable lying across the metal bars, but he didn't dare draw attention to himself with a sly character so near. He froze and waited until the Shadow had moved out of sight down the track towards his own caravan. At last Pip felt it was safe to move. The breeze was beginning to pick up as he swung himself down from the climbing frame, but Pip didn't think that was the only reason that he felt a shiver run down his back. He was glad to be on the move. It would soon be time for breakfast, and if he was honest, he would be glad of a friendly company now. A few leaves were beginning to fall in the wind, and one landed on his trainer. He dropped down to the ground. He bent to brush it off, and then picked it up to examine it. It was a bright yellow alder leaf, easy to recognise from its simple shape. He was just about to stand up when another leaf fell. This time it had the curly shape from an oak tree. It was green with brown on the edges. He was holding the two leaves in his hands, noticing the differences between them, when he began to remember the words of the note that they had found with the diary. One line seemed to come clearly back to his memory as he looked at the leaves in his hand. Elizabeth had written, "Within the leaves of this book you will find." He and Beth had always thought that meant within the pages of the book, but perhaps that was not what she really meant. She may have intended that Hunter should actually look for more clues under the other leaves that were glued in the diary. He and Beth had looked under the flowers at the beginning of the diary the other day, but because they didn't find any more lettering under them, they'd become discouraged and stopped looking. Now he really did begin to hurry back, and not just for breakfast. It wasn't until after breakfast's washing up had been done that Pip had a chance to tell Beth his idea about the leaves. Their next chore was always to make their beds, which never seemed to take very long. Now that they were on their own, he told Beth just how the leaves had reminded him of Elizabeth's letter. "So I'm wondering if there'll be any more clues under the other leaves," he said. "We'd better have another look then," she said, as he finished making his bed. "So you think there could be still some more clues towards the end of the diary?" "That's right, under the leaves, not the flowers." When Beth had looked at these last few pages the other day, she had noticed that the drawings were hurried, and the leaves didn't look as if they were fixed in very well either. These pages seemed quite different from the very careful way in which the rest of the diary had been made. Now they sat next to each other on her bed, and she turned the diary open straight away to September, the page which had given them the first clue. She turned over, and the next leaf was from an apple tree. Cautiously she began to lift it up. To their excitement they could see straight away that Pip was right. There was another clue written right under the leaf. "Wow!" she said, "just look at that. You should go out early every day if it makes your brain work so well." "Yeah, and I bet it isn't the only one we'll find either. I reckon you'd better get your notepad out. We're going to need to copy the lettering down again, because we don't want to damage the leaves by lifting them up too often." He took the diary, and Beth bent down to get her pad out from beside the cupboard. Carefully Pip peeled the apple leaf back, and this is what was revealed.
I wonder if you can read that. It says VITHSOLOMON 2. These were written in black, and after them was a pattern of crosses and lines similar to those under the rose leaf. Just write down the letters and numbers for now, and after breakfast we can get Nana to help us to understand what they mean, he told Beth.
"We can figure out if the patterns mean anything later on." Beth copied the lettering onto her page. "It's your turn to find the next one," she said. Turning over, Pip next lifted the damson leaf to reveal this one.
VIITHSTMATTHEW 13. Straight away they both recognised 7th St Matthew, and presumably verse 13. "Well, that one's quite easy," said Beth. "I hope the others are
too." Pip had already turned the next page. "Then I think you might find this one a bit of a problem," he answered. Beth peered under the leaf. "That does look different."
"Doesn't it?" she said. Indeed, the next clues seemed much more complicated than the earlier ones. All the clues they had seen so far consisted of letters and numbers, followed by a series of black and gold crosses. The next one not only had crosses at the end, but seemed to start with crosses too. Under the hawthorn leaf, it said this: XXX VIITHPS23. "Well," said Beth as she finished
copying it down. "There wasn't so much to write, but it seemed a bit complicated." "Can I have a look at the next one?" she asked. Beneath the sycamore leaf there was a lots of writing. "It's a good thing sycamore leaves are so big," said Pip. "There wouldn't have been room for all that under the small leaves." "You better read it out to me."
slowly, said Beth. This is what they saw. ISTJOSHUA7. This was followed by lots and lots of black and gold crosses. "This clue's going to be a hard one to work out," she sighed. "We'll never be able to solve that."
Pip was just beginning to feel the same when he turned it to the next page to see the deep brown copper beech leaf. The letters underneath it would have been very hard to decipher if it hadn't been for the fact that the very first reference Nana had shown Pip in the storybook had looked quite similar to this. He looked at the letters in the diary.
INDSAM Pip immediately spotted the name Sam in the middle. He remembered Nan saying the story of David and Goliath was in 1 Samuel. The Bible reference had been shortened to read 1ST Sam. So when he read IIND, he thought it might be 2 Samuel. "Just a minute," he said. "If it's 2 Samuel, then I might be able to work this one out. X means 10, so 10 plus 5 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 18. So you can just write 2 Samuel chapter 18, verse 9, he told Beth confidently.
"Well done," she said, amazed. "We must be nearly at the end by now." Indeed, Pip turned over the very last page, and there, beneath the oak leaf,
they both recognised another reference to St. Matthew's Gospel. "Let me do it," said Beth quickly. Pip smiled. He'd already worked out. "OK then, what does it mean?" he said. "Well, V means 5, so 5 and 1 makes 6. So it will be in Matthew chapter 6 and verse 21. Do you think so?" "Yep, I guess you're right," replied Pip, checking the letters.
VITHSTMATHEW 2-1. "It's not so difficult when you get the hang of it, is it?" he added. "Well, not for some of them," conceded Beth, "but I'm glad that we'll have some help on those other ones. I've no idea what they will mean."